Welcome, dear viewers. For more exclusive, thrilling stories every week, join our membership. Sit back, relax, and sip your coffee. Enjoy. Tourists worry about grizzly bears, and they should, but I've seen a 2-ton grizzly, mid-stride, suddenly stop, lift its nose to the wind, and just bolt. Run like the devil himself was on its tail. It's not a sound we can hear or a scent we can smell that does it. It's something else. As a ranger, you learn to trust the fear of the animals. When a grizzly runs, you don't ask why. You just know which valleys to avoid for the rest of the day, and you make sure you're back inside your cabin, door bolted, long before the sun touches the horizon. My name is Elijah Koyukon. Yeah, I know what you're thinking. Another native kid who never left home. Truth is, I tried. Went to UAF in Fairbanks for 4 years, got my degree in wildlife biology, even landed a decent job with Fish and Game down in Anchorage. Had a girlfriend named Maya who made killer salmon burgers and laughed at my terrible jokes. Life was good, predictable, normal. Then my grandmother Nayeli got sick. She lived in Healy, about 10 miles north of the park entrance, in the same cabin my great-grandfather built in 1952. When the cancer started eating at her lungs, she refused to leave for treatment in Anchorage. "The land holds me," she'd say in Koyukon, tapping her chest with a gnarled finger. "I go where it goes." So I came back. Took the ranger position mostly to stay close, figuring I'd spend a year or two helping her transition to whatever comes next. That was 3 years ago. Grandma Mayeli passed last winter, but by then I'd learned why she never left. The park has rules, not the ones posted on the visitor center bulletin board about food storage and trail permits. Different rules, older ones. The kind passed down through whispered conversations between rangers during shift changes at Wonder Lake Station. The kind written in cramped handwriting on index cards and tucked behind the coffee maker in the employee break room. Most rangers last 2 seasons, before transferring to Glacier Bay or Mount Rainier. Some cite the isolation. 6 months of winter darkness does things to your head. Others blame the pay or the housing. But I've watched enough of them pack their Subarus with shaking hands and refuse to make eye contact during their exit interviews to know the real reason. It's the rules. Specifically, what happens when you break them. Take Doug Petroff, my supervisor. 23 years of service, commendations from 3 different superintendents, and a reputation for keeping his cool in grisly encounters that would send most people running for their trucks. Last month, I found him sitting in his office at 3 a.m., staring at a blank incident report, his knuckles white around a mug of cold coffee. "You ever wonder," he said without looking up, "why the Athabascan people never built permanent settlements in certain valleys?" I told him no, but that was a lie. I've been wondering about a lot of things lately, like why the wildlife cameras in Savage River Canyon kept malfunctioning. Why experienced hikers sometimes emerged from the backcountry speaking in hushed tones about wrong sounds and trees that shouldn't grow there. Why my grandmother's last words to me were in Koyukon, "Tsim du tue gay," watch for what walks between. The rules exist for a reason. I'm going to tell you what they are and what I've seen when people ignore them. Maybe you'll think I'm making this up. Maybe you'll chalk it up to cabin fever or too much time alone in the wilderness. But if you ever find yourself working in Denali or camping in the backcountry after September, you'll remember this post, and you'll follow the rules, because the alternative is worse than any grizzly. The rules were handed to me on my first day by Ranger Tanya Kiska, a 40-something Danaina woman who'd been working the park since before I was born. She slid a folded piece of paper across the break room table like she was passing state secrets. Your real orientation, she said, stirring sugar into her coffee. Doug's too chicken shit to give you this himself. The paper was cream-colored, soft from handling, with 7 rules written in different handwritings, some in blue ink, others in pencil. One looked like it had been added recently in black marker. Rule 1. Never venture into the backcountry alone after 8 p.m. between September and March. If you must, carry a flare gun and use it at the first sign of audio distortion. Rule 2. If you encounter a wolf pack traveling in perfect single file, do not count them. Do not make eye contact. Back away slowly and report to base via radio using code White Dog. Rule 3. Any campfire spotted in Teclamica Valley after official camping season ends must be investigated before dawn. Take backup. Bring salt. Rule 4. If visitors report seeing the aurora borealis during daylight hours, close all backcountry access immediately. Lock the visitor center and wait for the all clear from Talkeetna. Rule 5. Missing persons reports for individuals with no gear or supplies should be filed immediately, but never followed up on until spring thaw. Rule 6. The ranger station in Polychrome Pass was abandoned in 1987. If you receive radio contact from there, respond with coordinates only. Do not acknowledge the voice. Rule 7. Added last month. If you find fresh graves with wooden crosses marked only with numbers, photograph them, but do not disturb. Report to Tanya immediately using landline only. I read through the list twice, my stomach doing something weird. This is a joke, right? Tanya's expression didn't change. She pulled out her phone and showed me a photo. It was taken at night, somewhere in dense spruce forest. The flash illuminated what looked like a campfire, but the flames were blue-white instead of orange, and they seemed to bend upward in spirals. Took this 2 weeks ago in Teclanica, she said. Hikers reported the fire at 11 p.m. By the time we got there at 4 a.m., we found 3 tents. Empty. Food still warm on camp stoves. Sleeping bags undisturbed. Where were the campers? Gone. She pocketed the phone. Deer was registered to a family from Portland. Henry and Linda Vasquez, their teenage daughter Carmen. Permits showed they'd been camping for 5 days. No emergency calls, no distress signals. My mouth felt dry. Did you find them? We found their car at the trailhead, keys in the ignition, wallets on the dashboard, clothes folded neat in the back seat like they'd changed into something else. Tanya stood up and rinsed her mug in the sink. Search and rescue spent 4 days combing that valley. Found nothing. Not even footprints leading away from the camp. I stared at the paper. What about Rule 7? The graves. That's new. Started happening after the Vasquez incident. She grabbed her jacket from the back of the chair. Found the first one near Savage River. Fresh dirt, wooden cross, just the number 34 carved into it. Doug thought maybe it was some kind of memorial thing, you know? People sometimes bury cremated remains. But ground-penetrating radar showed human remains. Full skeleton, recent burial. Her voice dropped. Park Service sent a forensics team from Anchorage. Dental records matched Carmen Vasquez. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Jesus. That's when we added Rule 7. Found 2 more graves since then. Numbers 35 and 36. Tanya paused at the door. Doug wants to keep this quiet until we understand what's happening. Tourism board would have our jobs if word got out about bodies appearing in the park. She left me alone with the rules and a dozen questions I wasn't sure I wanted answered. That first week, I told myself the whole thing was hazing. Some elaborate prank to mess with the new guy. I did my regular duties, trail maintenance, visitor education, wildlife monitoring, and tried to forget about blue fires and numbered graves. Then I had my first Rule 2 encounter. I was checking the condition of the East Fork Bridge when I saw them. 7 wolves moving through the valley below in perfect formation. Not the usual loose pack structure you'd expect, but a straight line, each animal exactly 3 feet behind the next. Their movements were synchronized, like they were marching to music only they could hear. My training kicked in. I reached for my camera to document the unusual behavior, but stopped when I remembered the rule. Do not count them. But I'd already started. 7 wolves. The number was stuck in my head like a splinter. The lead wolf turned and looked directly at me. Its eyes were the wrong color. Not yellow or amber like they should be, but pale blue, almost white. Human eyes. It held my gaze for what felt like minutes, but was probably only seconds, then opened its mouth. Instead of a howl, I heard something that made my skin crawl. A low humming sound, like electrical interference. The other wolves stopped moving. One by one, they turned to face me. All with those same pale eyes. All making that same buzzing sound that seemed to come from somewhere behind my eardrums. I backed away from the bridge railing, fumbling for my radio. Base, this is Co-Yukon. I've got a white dog situation at East Fork. Requesting backup. Doug's voice crackled through the static. Copy that. Return to station immediately. Do not engage. When I looked back down into the valley, the wolves were gone. No tracks in the snow. No sign they'd ever been there. But that humming sound followed me all the way back to the ranger station. 3 days after the wolf incident, I learned why Rule 5 existed. A family from Ohio had driven their rented Toyota up the park road, arguing about whether they'd taken the right exit off the highway. I watched them through the visitor center windows. Mom, dad, 2 kids, maybe 8 and 10 years old. Normal tourists. The dad wore a Cleveland Browns jersey and kept checking his phone for signal. The mom herded the kids toward the bathrooms while complaining about the drive from Fairbanks. 20 minutes later, only the dad walked out. "Excuse me," he said, approaching my desk. "My wife and kids went to use the restroom, but they're not coming back. Could you check if there's another exit?" I walked him over to the restroom building. Single entrance, single exit. 3 stalls inside, all empty. The hand soap dispenser was still dripping where someone had used it recently. "They were just here," the man said, his voice getting higher. Katie was helping Josh tie his shoes. Emma was washing her hands. He looked around the small space like his family might materialize from behind the paper towel dispenser. "This doesn't make sense." We searched for 2 hours. I called in Doug and Tanya, then expanded the search to include the nature trails and picnic areas. The man, Gary Hoffman, became increasingly frantic. He kept pulling out his phone to show me pictures of his family, as if I might have forgotten what they looked like in the past hour. They wouldn't just wander off, he insisted. Katie's afraid of bears. She made me promise we wouldn't get out of the car if we saw any wildlife. But that's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. In every photo Gary showed me, his wife and children were wearing heavy winter coats, wool hats, thick gloves. In one picture, the kids were building a snowman. It was September. 65 degrees. Everyone at the visitor center was wearing t-shirts. "Gary," I said carefully, "when did you take these photos?" He looked confused. "This morning, before we left the hotel." I studied the pictures again. Snow covered the ground in each image. The trees were bare. The lighting looked flat and gray, like midwinter. What hotel? The Pike's Lodge in Healy. We've been staying there for 3 days. He scrolled through more photos. See? Here's Katie making hot chocolate in our room yesterday. Pike's Lodge had been closed for renovations since July. I'd driven past it every day for 2 months. Plywood over the windows, construction equipment in the parking lot. That's when Rule 5 clicked into place. Missing persons reports for individuals with no gear or supplies should be filed immediately, but never followed up on until spring thaw. Gary Hoffman was reporting his family missing, but according to the evidence, they'd never existed, at least not in our current timeline. I filed the report as required, then called Tanya on her cell. Rule 5 situation, I said when she picked up. Gary Hoffman from Ohio. Wife and 2 kids vanished from the visitor center. Gear check? I looked at Gary, who was now sitting in his rental car, staring at the empty passenger seat. None. He's got photos of them, but they're dressed for winter. Says they've been staying at Pike's Lodge. Tanya was quiet for a long moment. I'll handle it. Keep him calm until I get there. She arrived 30 minutes later with a Park Service counselor named Dr. Rebecca Tananga, a soft-spoken woman who specialized in what the department euphemistically called wilderness stress incidents. They spoke with Gary for over an hour, using words like altitude adjustment and temporal displacement anxiety. When they were done, Gary seemed calmer but confused. He kept looking at his phone, frowning at the photos like he couldn't quite remember taking them. I think I need to head back to the hotel, he said finally. Maybe they went back there. We watched him drive away. His rental car had Ohio plates, but when I ran them through the system later, they came back registered to a Gary Hoffman who died in a car accident outside Cleveland 3 months ago. What the hell is happening here? I asked Tanya. Something that's been happening for years, she said. Maybe decades. We just started documenting it recently. Dr. Tanama pulled out a thick folder from her briefcase. I've been tracking similar incidents across Alaska's protected lands since 2019. Missing family members who don't match any records. People reporting deceased relatives as traveling companions. Visitors who remember staying in hotels that burned down or were demolished years ago. She showed me a map marked with red pins. Denali had 17 pins, more than any other location. The common factor, Dr. Tanana continued, is always the same. Families traveling together, but only one member remains. The remaining person has no memory of planning the trip alone. No explanation for why they'd travel hundreds of miles without companions. Where do the others go? We don't know, but we've learned not to search for them immediately. Experience suggests that search efforts during the initial incident window can lead to... She paused, choosing her words carefully. Additional disappearances among the search teams. That evening, I found myself back at Grandma Nayeli's cabin, sorting through her belongings for probably the 100th time since her death. I'd been putting off dealing with her papers, partly from grief, and partly because reading her handwriting felt like reopening wounds. But tonight, I was looking for something specific. Stories, warnings, anything about people disappearing in the park. I found it in a shoebox under her bed. Dozens of newspaper clippings, some dating back to the 1960s. Headlines like "Family of 4 vanishes during Denali camping trip" and "Search called off for missing tourists." But there were also handwritten notes in Koyukon, and when I translated them, they painted a picture that made my skin crawl. "The hungry time comes when leaves fall," one note read. "Spirits from before time wake. They take families back to when they were. Only strongest remain to remember." Another note, dated just 6 months before her death. "E. Must learn the rules. Park Service cannot protect against old hungers. The Between Walkers collect what was promised long ago. The Between Walkers, Chin Duthwe Gay." Her last words to me. I was still reading when my phone rang. Tanya's number. "We've got a problem," she said. "Doug just called. Someone's camping in Taclanica Valley. Visible campfire, multiple tents. It's 11 p.m. Rule 3. Any campfire spotted in Taclanica Valley after official camping season ends must be investigated before dawn. Take backup. Bring salt." "I'll meet you at the station in 20 minutes, I said. "Already here. And Elijah, pack extra batteries for your headlamp. Last time we investigated one of these fires, our equipment started failing about a mile in." I grabbed my gear bag and a container of table salt from Grandma's kitchen, then drove through the darkness toward what I was beginning to understand might be a very long night. As I passed Pike's Lodge, I slowed down. The construction equipment was gone. Warm light glowed in the windows. A sign by the road read, "Vacancy." In the parking lot sat a Toyota with Ohio plates. I didn't stop to investigate. Some mysteries I was learning were better left alone until morning. If morning came at all. The Taclanica Valley access road felt different at midnight. Tanya drove while I checked our gear. 2 headlamps each, extra batteries, emergency flares, first aid kit, and a pound bag of Morton salt that felt heavier than it should in my hands. "You ever done a Rule 3 investigation before?" I asked. "Twice. Both times we found camps, but..." Tanya slowed as our headlights caught the reflective trail markers. The people in them weren't exactly people anymore. She parked at the trailhead, and we gathered our equipment. The valley stretched ahead, a black void between snow-dusted ridges. Somewhere in that darkness, a campfire was burning. "Stay close," Tanya said, testing her radio. "If we get separated, use the emergency channel and head back to the truck. Don't wait for me." We hiked in silence for the first half-mile. Our footsteps crunched through frost-brittle leaves, and somewhere overhead, an owl called. Normal sounds. The kind that should have been comforting. Then my headlamp started flickering. "Mine too," Tanya whispered, tapping the side of her light. "Right on schedule." The beams grew weaker as we climbed deeper into the valley until we were walking through pools of yellow light that barely reached our feet. But ahead, through the trees, we could see the glow of the campfire. Not the warm orange of burning wood, but that same blue-white radiance Tanya had photographed weeks earlier. "Remember," she said, pulling out the salt, "don't look directly at anyone around the fire until we know what we're dealing with. And whatever they say to you, don't respond with your real name." We crept to within 50 yards of the camp. 3 dome tents arranged in a perfect triangle around the fire. Coleman camping chairs. A picnic table with food containers neatly arranged. It looked like any other backcountry campsite except for the people. There were 5 of them sitting around the fire. A middle-aged couple, 2 teenagers, and an older man in a flannel shirt. They weren't moving, not talking, not shifting in their chairs, not even blinking. They just stared into the flames like they were watching television. "The Vasquez family," Tanya breathed, plus 1 extra. I recognized them from the photos Doug had shown me, Henry and Linda Vasquez, their daughter Carmen. But the teenagers looked wrong somehow. Their skin had a waxy quality, like mannequins in the department store, and their clothes, the same hiking gear they'd been wearing when they disappeared, looked fresh. No dirt, no wear, like they'd just walked out of an REI catalog. The older man was familiar too, but it took me a moment to place him. Gary Hoffman, the tourist from Ohio who'd lost his family at the visitor center, except he was different now. His Cleveland Browns jersey was clean and unwrinkled, his posture too straight, his eyes reflecting the firelight like an animal's. "Jesus," I whispered. "Gary's here." "Gary who?" The Rule 5 guy from this afternoon, reported his wife and kids missing. But even as I said it, I realized something was wrong. Wait, you were there. You handled the case. Tanya turned to look at me, her face pale in the dying headlamp light. Elijah, I worked alone today. Talked to maybe 6 tourists, all of them day hikers. No missing persons reports. My stomach lurched. That's not... We spent hours searching for his family. Dr. Tanana was there, the counselor. There's no Dr. Tanana on our staff. The fire suddenly flared brighter, and all 5 figures around it turned to look directly at us. In unison, their movements perfectly synchronized, like marionettes controlled by the same puppeteer. "Run!" Tanya said. We crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping at our faces. Behind us, I could hear them following. Not running exactly, but moving through the forest with the steady rhythm of people taking a casual walk. No panting, no stumbling over roots or rocks. Just that constant even pace that somehow kept them right behind us no matter how fast we moved. My radio crackled with static. Then a voice came through, clear as if the speaker was standing right next to me. "Elijah, this is Dr. Tanana. Where are you? Gary's been asking for you." Tanya grabbed my radio and switched it off. "Don't respond to anything. Keep moving." We reached a small clearing where the moonlight was strong enough to see without headlamps. Tanya stopped and fumbled with the salt bag, pouring a line across the trail behind us. "Will that work?" "Sometimes. Depends on what they are." She was breathing hard now, her usual calm completely gone. The problem with Rule 3 investigations is that the camps aren't always in the same place when we find them. "What do you mean?" "I mean the Vasquez campsite was supposed to be 2 miles north of here, in a completely different drainage." She poured another salt line, creating an X pattern. But somehow we walked straight to it, like the geography changed to put us exactly where we needed to be. The sound of footsteps stopped. The forest went completely quiet. No wind in the trees, no animal sounds, even our breathing seemed muffled. Then Gary Hoffman stepped into the clearing. He looked exactly like he had one afternoon, but his smile was all wrong. Too wide, showing too many teeth, lasting too long. He stood just outside the salt lines and tilted his head at an angle that made my neck ache to look at. "Hey there, Ranger," he said, his voice perfectly normal except for a slight echo, like he was speaking from the bottom of a well. "Thanks for helping me find my family today. We're all together now." "You don't have a family," I said. "Your wife and kids never existed." Gary laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "That's funny, because Katie and Josh and Emma are right here with me." He gestured behind him, and 3 more figures emerged from the tree line. A woman and 2 children, all wearing winter clothes despite the mild September evening. All with that same waxy mannequin skin. The woman, who was supposed to be Katie Hoffman, looked at me with eyes that reflected light like a cat's. "We've been waiting for you, Elijah. Your grandmother told us you'd be coming." Every muscle in my body went cold. "My grandmother's dead." "Is she?" The little boy, Josh, stepped forward. His mouth moved when he spoke, but the voice that came out was elderly, feminine. Nayeli's voice. "E. Must learn the rules. The between walkers need someone to help them collect what was promised." I fumbled for the emergency flare in my backpack. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. "That won't help," the fake Carmen Vasquez said, appearing beside Gary. "You can't burn away what's already burned." She pulled back the sleeve of her jacket, and I saw why the search dogs had never found the campers. Carmen's arm was charred black, the skin cracked and peeling like overcooked meat. But there was no smell. no blood. Just the visual horror of flesh that had been consumed by fire, but somehow kept moving. The fake Katie stepped closer to the salt line. Your grandmother made a deal, Elijah. Her bloodline for protection of the old places. One from each generation to serve as guardian, to help collect the families that wandered too far into the hungry times. She never told me about any deal. She was hoping you'd leave, go back to Anchorage, find a nice girl, have children far from here. The thing wearing Linda Vasquez's face smiled with lips that were more like cracks in burnt wood. But you stayed, and now the debt passes to you. Tanya grabbed my arm. Light the flare, now. I pulled the pin, and the clearing exploded in red light. The figures around us didn't disappear, but their facades began to slip. Gary's too wide smile split his face completely in half. The children's winter clothes were revealed as burial shrouds. The woman calling herself Katie opened her mouth, and ash poured out instead of words. "Run for the truck," Tanya shouted. We sprinted through the forest, the flare casting wild shadows that moved independently of our bodies. Behind us, voices called out. Not the voices of the fake family, but other voices. Dozens of them, all speaking in unison, chanting something in a language that predated English, predated even the Koyukon words my grandmother had taught me. We reached the truck, and Tanya gunned the engine before I'd even closed my door. As we sped away from the trailhead, I looked back and saw lights moving through the trees. Not flashlights or headlamps, but the same blue-white glow of the campfire. Dozens of them, like a procession of ghosts, following us back toward civilization. What did they mean about a deal? I asked when we reached the main road. Tanya's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. I don't know, but your grandmother used to come to the ranger station sometimes, always during the off-season, always asking about missing persons reports. Doug thought she was just a concerned elder, keeping track of local safety issues. But you think different now. I think she knew more about what happens in this park than any of us realized. Tanya pulled into the ranger station parking lot and shut off the engine. And I think whatever arrangement she had with those things, it's not over. As if to emphasize her point, my radio crackled to life despite being turned off. Dr. Tanana's voice came through clearly. Good work tonight, Elijah. But there's still more collecting to do. The Autumn families are just the beginning. I ripped the batteries out of the radio, but the voice continued. Check your grandmother's cabin. She left instructions for you. The real rules. The ones that matter. The radio went silent, and in that silence, I heard something that made my blood freeze. Tanya heard it too, because she grabbed my arm and pointed toward the woods behind the station. Singing. Multiple voices harmonizing in Koyukon. The same song my grandmother used to hum while making fry bread. But Nayeli had been cremated 3 months ago. I'd scattered her ashes myself in the river behind her cabin. So who was singing her song in the forest at 2 a.m.? And why did it sound like she was calling my name? I drove to Grandmama Yeri's cabin at dawn, my hands still shaking from the night in Teklonica Valley. Tanya had insisted on following me, but I'd convinced her to wait at the ranger station. Whatever I was about to find, I needed to face it alone. The cabin sat in a grove of white spruce trees, exactly as she'd left it. I'd been avoiding the place since her funeral, telling myself I wasn't ready to deal with her belongings, but standing on the porch now, keys in my hand, I realized I'd been avoiding something else entirely. The smell hit me when I opened the door, not the musty scent of a house closed up for months, but something sharper. Smoke and burning leaves, with an undertone of copper that made my teeth ache. Someone had been here recently. The living room looked different. Furniture moved, books rearranged. The old rocking chair where Grandma used to sit faced the window instead of the fireplace. On the coffee table, someone had laid out newspaper clippings in a careful pattern, all the missing persons articles I'd found the night before, plus dozens more I hadn't seen. But these weren't just random disappearances. As I studied the layout, I saw the pattern. Every missing family had been reported in groups of 3 to 5 people. Every incident occurred between September and March, and every single case involved visitors staying at hotels that had been closed, demolished, or burned down years before their supposed visits. A handwritten note in Koyukan sat in the center of the arrangement. My translation was rusty, but I could make out the essentials. The hungry ones take the families who are already lost. The between-walkers collect what exists in the spaces between was and is. Underneath the note was a key I'd never seen before. Old brass, with symbols carved into the metal that looked like a mix of Athabascan pictographs and something older. I found what the key opened in the back bedroom. Behind Grandma's wardrobe was a door I'd somehow never noticed in 30 years of visiting this cabin. The key turned easily, and the door swung open to reveal a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. The basement smelled like earth and old paper. My flashlight beam revealed a room that shouldn't have existed. The cabin's foundation was too shallow for this space. But here it was anyway, lined with wooden shelves and file cabinets that looked like they'd been here for decades. The files contained records of every strange incident in the park dating back to 1961. Missing persons reports, unexplained animal behavior, seasonal closures that weren't listed in any official documentation. But these weren't Park Service records. The handwriting changed across the decades, but the format was consistent. Someone, multiple someones, had been tracking this information independently. I found my grandmother's contributions starting in 1983. Her notes were more detailed than the earlier records, written in both English and Koyukan. She'd documented 23 family disappearances over 40 years, all following the same pattern. She'd also tracked the people who reported these families missing. People like Gary Hoffman, who remembered loved ones that seemed to exist in a different timeline. But the most disturbing file was labeled Collectors, Active Status. It contained photographs and personal information for 12 individuals over the past 60 years. Park rangers mostly, but also a few civilian volunteers. All of them had made of ancestry. All of them had family members who'd worked in the park or lived in the surrounding communities. The last entry was my own ranger ID photo, clipped to a handwritten note. E. Koyukan. Grandson. Appointed September 15th. Grandmother's obligation transferred upon death. Training to begin after first collection. First collection. Like Gary Hoffman and his non-existent family. At the bottom of the file was a leather journal bound with sinew. The cover was worn smooth from handling, and when I opened it, I found entries in my grandmother's handwriting dating back decades. But these weren't just observations, they were instructions. The between-walkers are not evil, one entry read. They serve a function that keeps the boundaries stable. When people exist in multiple timelines simultaneously, living and dead, here and gone, they create tears in the fabric of place memory. Left unchecked, these tears would eventually consume entire regions. Another entry, dated just 2 weeks before her death. E resists his inheritance, but the resistance makes him stronger. The collectors who accept willingly burn out within 5 years. Those who fight the calling can serve for decades. The between-walkers prefer the fighters. I flipped through pages of careful observations. Seasonal patterns, lunar cycles, geographic coordinates where the timeline tears appeared most frequently. She'd been mapping the phenomenon like a scientist, trying to understand the rules that governed it. Near the end of the journal, I found a section titled the collection process. My blood went cold as I read her description of what I'd experienced with Gary Hoffman. The collectors didn't choose which families to take. The families chose themselves by existing in temporal paradox, remembering things that hadn't happened, visiting places that no longer existed, traveling with companions who died in other timelines. The role of the collector, Grandma had written, is to guide these displaced souls to the between-walkers, who can return them to their proper place in the sequence of events. Without this intervention, the paradox grows stronger until it begins affecting others. Eventually, entire communities can become trapped in temporal loops. The last entry was dated the day she died. E must understand that this is not a curse, but a responsibility. Our family has served as guardians for 7 generations. The Between-Walkers offered the original compact to protect our people from the hunger that follows failed time. If he refuses, the debt will compound. Eventually, they will collect our entire bloodline to satisfy the obligation. I closed the journal and sat in the dark basement, trying to process what I'd learned. My grandmother hadn't been a victim of some supernatural entity. She'd been working with them. For 40 years, she'd been helping collect families who'd somehow slipped between different versions of reality. And now they expected me to take her place. My flashlight beam caught something else on the shelf, a radio set that looked military surplus, probably from the 1960s. It was powered on, though I couldn't see any electrical connection. As I watched, the needle on the frequency dial began moving on its own, sweeping across the bands until it locked onto a signal. Static filled the basement. Then a voice emerged. Clear, calm, definitely human, but speaking in a dialect of Koyukon I'd never heard before. Young Guardian, you have read the records. Do you understand your grandmother's legacy? I found myself responding before I could think about it. I understand that you've been using my family as labor for 60 years. A sound that might have been laughter came through the radio. Labor suggests coercion. Your great-great-grandmother sought us out in 1943, when the military base at Ladd Field began creating temporal disturbances with their radio experiments. She requested protection for her people in exchange for service. And if I refuse? Then the compact ends, and the accumulated paradoxes release at once. Every family we have collected over 60 years returns simultaneously to this timeline. Your small community becomes host to several hundred displaced souls, all existing in contradiction to the current sequence of events. I thought about Gary Hoffman and his burned family, about the dozens of other missing persons cases in the files. Hundreds of people, all like them, all returning to a world where they didn't belong. The choice is yours, young guardian, but choose quickly. The autumn gathering has begun, and there are already 3 new families waiting for collection. Each day of delay makes the paradox stronger. The radio went silent, leaving me alone in the basement with 60 years of family history and a decision that would define the rest of my life. I climbed the stairs slowly, carrying the journal and the files. Outside, the morning sun was burning off the frost, and somewhere in the distance, I could hear the sound of the park road opening for the day. Tourists would be driving up from Anchorage, families planning camping trips and wildlife photography excursions. Some of them were already dead in other timelines. Some were traveling with companions who existed only in parallel versions of their own memories. And according to my grandmother's records, it was my job to help the Between-Walkers collect them before their paradoxes tore holes in reality itself. The question was, did I trust 60 years of family tradition, or did I try to find another way? My phone buzzed with a text from Tanya. Doug needs to see you. Emergency at the visitor center. Another Rule 5 situation. I looked at the journal in my hands, then at the forest surrounding the cabin. Somewhere out there, the between-walkers were waiting for my answer. Time to find out what I was really made of. When I arrived at the visitor center, Doug was pacing outside like a caged animal. His usually neat uniform was wrinkled, and he kept checking his watch every few seconds. "Where the hell have you been?" he demanded. "We've got a situation." Tanya said Rule 5. "What's the details?" Doug gestured toward the parking lot, where a woman in her 50s was sitting on a bench, staring at a minivan with Minnesota plates. Rebecca Chen says she drove up from Anchorage with her husband and teenage son. They went inside to use the bathroom 2 hours ago. I felt the familiar weight in my stomach. Let me guess. No husband or son on the visitor logs, no record of them buying permits or checking in. Worse than that. Doug handed me a clipboard. She's got photos on her phone, family vacation shots from the past week. Problem is, every single picture shows them visiting parks that don't exist. I looked at the woman more closely. Rebecca Chen appeared normal enough. Hiking boots, fleece jacket, the kind of practical gear that suggested an experienced outdoors family. But something about her posture was off. She sat too straight, too still, like she was afraid to move. "Have you talked to her?" "Tried. She keeps insisting her family is just taking a long time in the bathroom." "But Elijah..." Doug lowered his voice. "The men's and women's restrooms have been locked for maintenance since yesterday. She couldn't have seen anyone go inside." I approached Rebecca carefully, remembering my grandmother's journal. The families choose themselves by existing in temporal paradox. This woman was living in two realities simultaneously, one where her family existed, and one where they never had. "Ms. Chen? I'm Ranger Kolyukon. I understand you're waiting for your family." She looked up at me with eyes that were slightly unfocused, like she was looking through me rather than at me. "They went to use the facilities. My husband David gets cranky when he has to wait in lines, so I told them I'd wait with the van." She gestured toward the locked bathroom building. "They should be out any minute." "Can you tell me about your trip, where you've been staying?" Rebecca smiled, and for a moment she seemed completely normal. "We've been having the most wonderful time. Stayed 3 nights at the Denali Princess Lodge, then 2 nights camping at Riley Creek. David's never been much for camping, but Marcus, that's our son, he insisted we try it." The Denali Princess Lodge had closed permanently in 2018. Riley Creek Campground didn't open for the season until May, and it was now mid-September. But Rebecca was talking about her stay there like it had happened yesterday. "Could I see some of those photos you mentioned?" She eagerly pulled out her phone and scrolled through dozens of pictures. The images showed a family of 3, Rebecca, a middle-aged man, and a teenager who looked about 17. But as I studied the photos more closely, I noticed discrepancies that made my skin crawl. In one picture, they were standing in front of the visitor center, but the building in the background had architectural details that hadn't existed for years. A different paint scheme, windows in the wrong places. Another photo showed them at what was supposed to be Wonder Lake, but the landscape was subtly wrong, mountains in positions that didn't match the actual geography. "This is a beautiful family," I said carefully. "How long have you been married to David?" 23 years this October. We met in college in Minneapolis. He was studying forestry. I was in education." Rebecca's voice had the practiced rhythm of someone who'd told this story many times. "Marcus just started his senior year of high school. He wants to study wildlife biology like his dad." Every detail sounded rehearsed but also genuine. She believed every word she was saying. In her timeline, David and Marcus Chen existed. They had a history together, shared memories, a life that felt completely real to her. The problem was that in our timeline, they'd never existed at all. My radio crackled. Koyukon, this is base. We're getting reports of unusual activity in the Savage River area. Multiple witnesses reporting the family camping in the restricted zone. I keyed the radio. Copy that. Type of activity? Witnesses say they can see a campfire and hear people talking, but when they approach, there's nobody there. Just empty campsites with fresh gear. Rebecca looked up sharply. That sounds like David and Marcus. They mentioned wanting to find a quiet spot to set up camp for tonight. She stood up abruptly. Maybe they went ahead to scout locations while I waited here. Ms. Chen, the Savage River area is closed to camping. If your family is there, they could be in danger. For the first time since I'd started talking to her, Rebecca looked worried. Danger? From what? David grew up camping in Minnesota. He knows what he's doing. I made a decision that felt like stepping off a cliff. I'll take you there. Help you find them. Doug grabbed my arm as Rebecca walked toward my truck. What are you doing? You know what this is? Yeah, I do. And according to my grandmother's records, the longer we wait, the stronger the paradox becomes. I pulled free from his grip. She's been existing in 2 timelines for hours. If I don't help resolve this soon, the temporal distortion could start affecting other people. By resolve, you mean? I mean I help her find her family. One way or another. The drive to Savage River took 40 minutes. Rebecca spent the entire trip telling these stories about David and Marcus, describing family vacations and holiday traditions with the kind of detail that only comes from genuine memory. But every story she told contained small inconsistencies, restaurants that had closed years ago, events that happened in the wrong seasons, friends whose names changed mid-conversation. When we reached the restricted area, I could see what the witnesses had reported. About half a mile up the valley, smoke was rising from what looked like a campfire. Through binoculars, I could make out 2 figures moving around a tent. There they are, Rebecca pointed excitedly. I told you they'd just gone ahead to set up camp. But as I adjusted the binoculars, I realized the figures weren't quite right. They moved too slowly, too deliberately, and their proportions seemed off, like someone had tried to sculpt people from memory, but gotten the details wrong. Stay here, I told Rebecca. Let me go talk to them first, make sure everything's okay. I hiked up the valley alone, carrying a bag of salt and the emergency flare I hadn't used the night before. As I got closer to the campsite, I could hear voices. A man and a teenager having a conversation about setting up their sleeping bags. Normal family camping talk. But when I crested the ridge and could see the camp clearly, my blood went cold. There were 2 figures there, just as Rebecca had said. But they weren't people. They were more like 3-dimensional photographs, flickering at the edges like old film projector images. The man calling himself David was translucent enough that I could see the trees behind him through his chest. The teenager had no shadow despite the bright afternoon sun. They looked up when I approached, and their faces were exactly like the people in Rebecca's photos. But their eyes were wrong, flat and reflective, like black mirrors. You must be the ranger, the David thing said, its voice carrying from too many directions at once. Rebecca mentioned you were helping her find us. She's worried about you, says you've been gone for hours. The Marcus thing tilted its head in a way that reminded me of the fake Gary Hoffman. Time works differently here. We've been waiting for decades. Waiting for what? For someone to help us get home. David thing gestured around the campsite. We're not supposed to be here. This isn't our place, our time. but we can't find our way back without help. I understood then what my grandmother's journal had been trying to tell me. These weren't evil entities wearing the faces of Rebecca's family. They were the actual David and Marcus Chen, trapped in a timeline where they existed only as echoes of Rebecca's memories. They needed to be collected and returned to whatever reality they belonged in. What do you need me to do? Bring Rebecca here, Marcus Thing said. Let her see us as we really are. When she understands that we're not alive in the way she remembers, she can let us go. I hiked back down to the truck, my mind racing. Rebecca was still waiting, scanning the valley with my binoculars. Did you find them? Are they okay? They're fine. But Rebecca, I need to prepare you for something. Your husband and son. They're not exactly what you remember. Her expression shifted, confusion mixing with fear. What do you mean? I mean they exist, but not in the way you think they do. They need your help to get to where they belong. I guided her up the valley, explaining as gently as I could that David and Marcus were caught between different versions of reality. She listened with growing distress, occasionally stopping to insist that I was wrong, that her family was real and alive and waiting for her. When we reached the campsite, the two figures were still there, but now Rebecca could see them as they truly were, translucent, flickering, more memory than substance. David? She called, her voice breaking. Marcus? The David thing turned toward her, and for a moment its face solidified, becoming fully human. Hey, Becca, we've been waiting for you to understand. Rebecca collapsed to her knees, finally seeing the truth. Her family wasn't missing. They were dead. Had been dead for years, killed in a car accident outside Minneapolis that she'd somehow erased from her own memory. The camping trip, the vacation photos, all of it was her mind's way of keeping them alive. I can't let you go, she whispered. If I let you go, you'll be gone forever. We're already gone, Marcus Thing said gently. But we can't rest until you're ready to remember what really happened. The air around the campsite began to shimmer, and I felt the same temporal distortion I'd experienced in Teklanika Valley. Reality was bending around Rebecca's grief, trying to accommodate two contradictory truths. I pulled out my radio and keyed the emergency channel. This is Koyukon, code White Dog, requesting immediate assistance from the Between Walkers. The response came immediately, not through the radio, but as a voice in my head. Well done, young guardian. You understand your role now. The air shimmered again, and three figures emerged from the forest. Not the burned, monstrous things I'd expected, but tall, graceful beings that looked almost human, except for their eyes. Deep black voids that seemed to contain infinite space. Rebecca Chen, one of them said, its voice like wind through pine trees. Your family is ready to continue their journey. Will you release them? Rebecca looked at her husband and son one last time. They were starting to fade, becoming more transparent with each passing moment. Will I see them again? When your own journey ends, yes. But not before. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I love you both. I'm sorry I couldn't let you go sooner. David and Marcus smiled, genuinely human expressions for just a moment, then dissolved into motes of light that drifted upward and disappeared. The Between Walkers turned to me. You have learned the first lesson, Guardian. The families we collect are not victims. They are souls who have lost their way between life and death, trapped by love and memory. Your role is to help them find peace. One of them handed me something, a small obsidian pendant on a leather cord. Wear this. It will help you see the displaced ones more clearly. There will be many more before the season ends. They faded back into the forest, leaving me alone with Rebecca, who was sitting in the empty campsite, staring at the place where her family had been. "What happens to me now?" she asked. "Now you go home to Minneapolis. You remember your husband and son as they lived, not as you needed them to be." I helped her to her feet. "And you let yourself grieve properly." As we walked back down the valley, I realized I'd made my choice. Whatever the cost, whatever the obligations, I couldn't let families like Rebecca's suffer in temporal limbo while I debated the ethics of my inheritance. The Betweenwalkers had their guardian, and autumn was just beginning. The obsidian pendant felt warm against my chest as I drove back to the ranger station. Rebecca Chem sat quietly in the passenger seat, staring out at the landscape like she was seeing it for the first time, which, in a way, she was. "I remember the accident now," she said as we pulled into the parking lot. December 23rd, 2019, black ice on Highway 35. David was driving us home from Marcus's basketball game. Her voice was steady, but I could see her hands shaking. "They died instantly. The doctor said I had a severe concussion, memory loss. I spent 3 months in rehabilitation." "What's the last thing you remember before waking up here?" "Sitting in my kitchen in Minneapolis, looking at vacation brochures. I'd been planning this trip for months, thinking it would help me feel closer to them." She touched the window glass. "I guess I never actually left home." I parked next to Doug's truck and turned off the engine. "Rebecca, when you get back to Minnesota, you're going to need to talk to someone. A counselor, maybe a therapist who specializes in grief trauma. What happened here isn't something you should process alone." She nodded, though I wasn't sure she was really listening. "Will I remember this? Meeting you, seeing them as they really were?" "I think so. The Betweenwalkers don't usually erase memories. They just help people see the truth they've been avoiding." Doug was waiting for us inside the visitor center, along with a woman I didn't recognize. She was young, maybe early 30s, wearing a dark suit that looked expensive and out of place in the park setting. "This is Agent Sarah Wickham," Doug said. "FBI. She's here about the missing persons cases." I felt the pendant grow warmer against my skin. FBI. Since when does the Bureau investigate missing hikers? Agent Wickham stepped forward, her expression professionally neutral. Since we started noticing patterns across multiple national parks, families disappearing under similar circumstances, reports of supernatural phenomena, and a concerning number of cases involving alleged temporal anomalies. Rebecca looked confused. Temporal what? People reporting events that couldn't have happened, Wickham explained. Staying in hotels that were demolished years ago, visiting locations that don't exist, traveling with family members who died in other timelines. She looked directly at me. "We've been tracking these incidents for the past 2 years. Denali has the highest concentration of cases." Doug shifted uncomfortably. "Agent Wickham wants to interview our staff about the unusual protocols we've developed for handling these situations." The pendant was getting almost hot now. I could feel it pulsing against my chest like a second heartbeat. Either Agent Wickham was exactly what she claimed to be, or she was something else entirely. "I'd be happy to cooperate," I said carefully. "But first, I should get Ms. Chem to the airport. She's had a difficult day." "Actually, I'd like to speak with Ms. Chen first," Wickham said. "Her case fits the pattern we've been investigating." Rebecca looked between us, clearly overwhelmed. "I just want to go home. I need to arrange memorial services. I should have done that years ago." Of course. But your experience here could help us understand what's happening to other families. Wickham pulled out a digital recorder. It would only take a few minutes. The pendant was burning now. I caught Doug's eye and saw my own concern reflected there. Something about this felt wrong. Agent Wickham, could I see your credentials again? She handed me her badge and ID. Everything looked official. FBI seal, holographic security features, her photo and signature. But when I looked closer, I noticed something that made my blood cold. The issue date on the ID was September 15th of this year, today's date. This ID was issued this morning, I said. Wickham smiled, and her expression changed completely. The professional mask slipped away, revealing something predatory underneath. Very observant, Guardian. Your grandmother chose her successor well. Doug stepped back. What the hell is going on? The woman who'd been calling herself Sarah Wickham began to change. Her business suit faded, revealing clothes that looked like they belonged in a different era. Rough wool, hand-stitched leather. Her face remained the same, but her eyes became the deep black voids I'd seen in the forest. I am not your enemy, she said, her voice now carrying that same multi-directional quality I'd heard from the fake David Chen. But there are others who wish to disrupt the compact your family has maintained. Rebecca grabbed my arm. What is she? One of the between walkers, I said, my hand moving instinctively to the pendant. But why the disguise? Because there are forces that seek to expose our work to your federal authorities. If the human government learns about the temporal collection system, they will attempt to weaponize it. The being gestured toward the visitor center windows. Even now, there are actual agents investigating reports of anomalous activity in this park. As if summoned by her words, 2 black SUVs pulled into the parking lot. Real federal agents, I realized, based on their coordinated movements and communication equipment. How long do we have? I asked. Minutes. They have been tracking cellular and radio anomalies in this area for weeks. Your recent activities have created enough electromagnetic disturbance to draw their attention. Doug was staring at the approaching vehicles. This is insane. Are you telling me the government doesn't know about whatever's been happening here? Your Park Service supervisors know, the between walker said, but they have maintained secrecy through careful compartmentalization. If federal investigators discover the full scope of the temporal collection system, they will shut it down immediately. And if they do that, every soul we have collected over the past 60 years returns to this timeline simultaneously. The paradox would tear this entire region apart, possibly affecting the continental landmass. Through the windows, I could see agents getting out of their vehicles. Real ones this time, with proper equipment and genuine federal credentials. What do you need me to do? The between walker handed me a small device that looked like a cross between a compass and a radio. This will mask the electromagnetic signatures of our operations, but only for a limited time. You must complete 3 more collections before the autumn equinox, or the accumulated temporal energy will become too great to contain. 3 more families? 3 more families who exist in Paradox. They are already here, scattered across the park in different timelines. The device will help you locate them before the federal agents do. Rebecca was backing toward the exit. I want to leave. Now I don't want any part of this. Ms. Chen, please wait, I said. But she was already pushing through the door. She made it about 10 feet before one of the real FBI agents intercepted her. I could hear him introducing himself, asking about her experience in the park, requesting an interview about any unusual phenomena she might have witnessed. She will tell them everything, the between walker said calmly. Her memories have been restored, including her encounter with us. The federal investigation will escalate rapidly. Doug was pale. So what's our move? We follow protocol, I said, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. Agent Wickham here is going to disappear back into whatever reality she came from. Doug, you're going to cooperate fully with the Rio FBI agents while giving them absolutely no useful information. And I'm going to find those 3 families before anyone else does. The between-walker nodded approvingly. You understand the urgency. I understand that if I don't handle this, a lot of innocent people are going to suffer. I pocketed the device she'd given me. But I need backup. Tanya knows about the rules. She can help. Ranger Kiska has been exposed to too much temporal energy. If she participates in another collection, the paradox will begin affecting her directly. The being's form was already starting to fade. You must work alone, Guardian, as your grandmother did. My grandmother had 40 years to learn this job. I've had 3 days. Then you must learn quickly. The federal agents will discover evidence of our operations within hours. After that, the window for completing the autumn collections closes permanently. She vanished completely, leaving Doug and me staring at each other while the real FBI agents approached the visitor center. Any brilliant ideas? Doug asked. I looked at the device in my hand. Its display showed 3 red dots scattered across a map of the park, each one pulsing slowly like a heartbeat. 3 families existing in temporal paradox, waiting for someone to help them find their way home. Yeah, we do our jobs, answer their questions honestly, but stick to the facts we can prove. Don't mention the rules, don't mention my grandmother's research, and definitely don't mention the between walkers. And while we're being interrogated by federal agents, I'm going to use every trick my grandmother ever taught me about moving through this park unseen. I headed for the back exit. Cover for me as long as you can. Elijah, wait. Doug grabbed my shoulder. What if this goes wrong? What if you can't find those families in time? I thought about Rebecca Chin, sitting in her kitchen for 3 years, living with the dead. I thought about Gary Hoffman and his burned family, trapped in a timeline where their deaths had become their eternal existence. I thought about my grandmother, spending 40 years carrying this burden alone. Then we find out what happens when 60 years of collected souls try to exist in the same timeline simultaneously. I pushed open the door, but I'm not going to let that happen. As I stepped into the late afternoon sunlight, the device in my hand pulsed brighter. Somewhere in the park, 3 families were waiting. They didn't know they were dead, didn't understand that they were caught between realities, didn't realize that their continued existence was slowly tearing holes in the fabric of time itself. But they would soon. The autumn collection was far from over, and I was running out of time to complete it before the federal government discovered what my family had been hiding in Denali for the past 60 years. The pendant against my chest pulsed in rhythm with the device, both of them responding to something approaching through the forest. Something that felt like footsteps, but moved with the steady rhythm of people who had been walking for decades without rest. Collection number 2 was coming to find me. The device led me through terrain I'd never seen before, even after 3 years of working in the park. Trails that didn't appear on any map. Valleys that seemed to exist in the spaces between established landmarks. The obsidian pendant grew warmer as I followed the pulsing red dot northward, deeper into backcountry that felt increasingly removed from the world I knew. After 2 hours of hiking, I heard them before I saw them. Voices carried on the wind, a Mormon woman arguing about directions, children complaining about being tired. Normal family camping sounds that would have been comforting if they weren't coming from a section of wilderness that had been closed to public access for 5 years. I crested a ridge and found them in a meadow that shouldn't have existed. According to my topographic maps, this area was steep forest, too rocky and overgrown for camping. But here was a perfect clearing with a creek running through it, surrounded by aspens that were showing fall colors weeks ahead of schedule. The family sat around a picnic table that looked like it had been recently installed, eating sandwiches and consulting a park brochure that appeared to be from the 1990s. The father was a big man with a salt and pepper beard, wearing a flannel shirt and work boots. The mother was smaller, dark-haired, with the kind of weathered hands that suggested a life of outdoor work. Two kids, maybe 10 and 12, were throwing rocks at the creek while their parents debated their hiking route for the next day. They looked completely normal, alive, solid, present. But the pendant against my chest was burning, and the electromagnetic device in my pocket was clicking rapidly like a Geiger counter near radioactive material. I approached slowly, making enough noise that they'd hear me coming. "Excuse me, folks. I'm Ranger Koyukan with the Park Service." The father looked up and smiled. "Hey there, Ranger. Beautiful spot you've got here. We were just trying to figure out how to get to Wonder Lake from here." "I'm sorry, but this area is actually closed to camping. Has been for several years due to unstable soil conditions." I gestured around the meadow. "I'm going to need you to pack up and move to one of the designated camping areas." The woman frowned. "That's strange. The ranger at the gate told us this was one of the best spots in the park. Even gave us a map showing the trail to get here." She handed me a photocopied map that made my skin crawl. It showed trails that had been decommissioned in the 1980s, campgrounds that had been closed for decades, even a visitor center that had been demolished and rebuilt in a completely different location. "What's your name?" I asked the father. "Bill Mackenzie." "This is my wife Sandra, and our kids Tyler and Ashley." He gestured toward the children, who had stopped throwing rocks and were now staring at me with the same flat, reflective eyes I'd seen in other displaced families. "We're from Wasilla. Been coming to Denali every summer for 15 years. "What year is it, Bill?" He laughed. "That's an odd question. It's 2008, of course. July 12th. We always take our vacation the second week of July. But it was September 2023, which meant the Mackenzie family had been camping in this meadow for 15 years, reliving the same week over and over, aging backward through time until they'd become trapped in their own best memory of Denali. Bill, I need you to listen carefully. You and your family have been in the park longer than you think. A lot longer." Sandra stood up, her expression shifting from confusion to fear. "What do you mean?" "We just got here this morning. Drove up from Wasilla, stopped at the grocery store in Healy for supplies." The grocery store in Healy closed in 2015. It's been a hardware store for 8 years now. Tyler, the older boy, stepped closer to his parents. When he spoke, his voice had an odd echo, like it was coming from the bottom of a well. "Mom, why is the ranger trying to scare us?" "I'm not trying to scare you. I'm trying to help you understand that you're lost. Not geographically lost, temporally lost. You've been camping in this meadow since 2008, but time has been moving around you while you stayed in place." Bill's face was getting red. "That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Are you feeling okay, Ranger? Maybe you've been spending too much time alone out here." I pulled out my phone and showed them the date. September 18th, 2023. The family gathered around the screen, their expressions shifting from disbelief to growing horror. "That can't be right," Sandra whispered. "Our kids. Tyler's supposed to start 7th grade in the fall. Ashley's going into 5th. How old are they now?" Sandra looked at her children as if seeing them clearly for the first time. Tyler was tall, lanky, the kind of build that suggested he should be in his 20s. Ashley had the facial structure of a teenager, though she'd been acting like a 10-year-old all afternoon. "We've been here for 15 years," Bill said slowly, "camping in the same spot, following the same routine, having the same conversations." "Not exactly the same," I said gently. "You've been aging backward, returning to younger and younger versions of yourselves. Pretty soon, you'll be so young that you'll cease to exist entirely." Ashley started crying, but the tears that fell from her eyes weren't tears. They were drops of something that looked like water, but evaporated before hitting the ground. "What happened to us?" Sandra asked. "How did we get trapped here?" I consulted my grandmother's journal, which I brought along. According to her notes, temporal loops often formed around families who died during what should have been perfect moments. The Mackenzie family had probably been killed in a car accident on their way home from what they considered the best vacation of their lives. Rather than accepting death, they'd unconsciously chosen to retreat into that perfect memory, living it over and over while time moved forward without them. "You died," I said simply. "Probably on July 19th, 2008, driving home from this trip. But instead of moving on, you've been hiding in this moment, trying to make it last forever." Bill sat down heavily on the picnic bench. "I remember now. The truck that ran the red light in Fairbanks. We were talking about coming back next year, making it an annual tradition." "You can still make that choice," I said, "but not here, not like this. You have to let go of this moment and move forward to whatever comes next." My radio crackled with static. Then Doug's voice came through. "Elijah, where are you? The FBI agents are asking about you specifically. They want to interview you about anomalous electromagnetic readings in your patrol sector." I keyed the radio. "Tell them I'm conducting a wellness check on some backcountry campers. I'll be back in a few hours." "They're not buying it. They want coordinates for your location." "Can't give coordinates for a location that doesn't officially exist." I switched off the radio before Doug could respond. The Mackenzie family was looking at me expectantly. "What happens if we agree to move on?" Sandra asked. "You find out what comes after. For you, for your kids. You get to experience whatever was supposed to happen next, instead of being trapped in the same perfect week forever." Tyler, who was looking more like a young adult with each passing minute, stepped forward. "Will we still be together?" "I don't know. But I do know that staying here isn't really being together. It's just being stuck." The meadow around us began to shimmer, and I felt the familiar sensation of reality bending. The between-walkers were coming, drawn by the family's growing acceptance of their situation. 3 figures emerged from the aspen grove, their black void eyes reflecting the late afternoon sunlight. "Mackenzie family," one of them said in that wind-through-trees voice. "Are you ready to continue your journey?" Bill looked at his wife and children, then back at the picnic table where they'd been eating lunch for 15 years. "Will we remember this? The good parts, I mean." "You will remember everything that brought you joy," the between-walker assured him. "But you will no longer be bound by the need to relive it." Sandra took her husband's hand. "I'm ready. Kids?" Tyler and Ashley nodded, though Ashley was now clearly a teenager, her childhood face fading like a photograph left in sunlight. The family gathered their belongings, items that had somehow remained new and functional despite 15 years of use, and followed the between-walkers toward the tree line. As they walked, they became more translucent with each step, until they were just suggestions of people against the darkening forest. "Thank you," Bill called back to me, "for helping us understand." They disappeared into the aspens, and the meadow began to change around me. The perfect grass became rocky ground scattered with deadfall. The picnic table dissolved into a fallen log. The creek dried to a seasonal trickle that probably only ran during spring snowmelt. My device showed one red dot extinguished, 2 remaining. But the electromagnetic readings were getting stronger, not weaker. Each collection was increasing the temporal energy in the area, making it easier for the FBI agents to track the anomalies. I consulted the device again. The next family was close, maybe 2 miles northwest, in an area that park records showed as a burned-over section from a wildfire in 2019. But according to the electromagnetic readings, something was there that shouldn't be. Something that was broadcasting temporal signatures strong enough to interfere with satellite communications. My phone buzzed with a text from Tanya. FBI agents found Rebecca Chen's rental car at the airport. She's telling them everything about what happened today. They're organizing a full search team to sweep the backcountry for you. I typed back, "How long do I have?" "Maybe 2 hours before they mobilize helicopters with heat sensors. 2 hours to find 2 more families and help them understand that they were living in temporal paradox. 2 hours to complete collections that my grandmother would have taken weeks to accomplish safely." The pendant was growing warm again, responding to something approaching through the forest. But these footsteps sounded different. Heavier, more numerous. Not a family walking together, but something that moved like a small army marching in formation. Collection number 3 was going to be different from the others. I could feel it in the way the air itself seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for something that had been building toward this moment for decades. The device in my hand started clicking faster, and somewhere in the distance, I heard the sound of helicopters warming up at the ranger station. Time was running out, and the most difficult collection was still ahead. The third collection nearly killed me. I found them in the burned section where no trees should grow. 37 people arranged in perfect military formation, all wearing park ranger uniforms from different decades. Some carried equipment I recognized from the 1960s. Others wore patches from administrative periods that had ended before I was born. At the center stood a woman who looked exactly like my grandmother, but younger, wearing the uniform she'd been buried in. They weren't a family in the traditional sense. They were every park guardian who died while serving the compact, trapped in an eternal patrol of the boundaries between realities. Rangers who'd been killed by exposure, animal attacks, accidents, all collected by the between walkers and assigned to protect the park in death as they had in life. "Hello, grandson," the woman who looked like Nayeli said. "We've been waiting for you to understand the full scope of your inheritance." The FBI helicopters were circling overhead, their heat sensors undoubtedly picking up the massive electromagnetic signature of 37 displaced souls standing in formation. Agent radios crackled in the distance as search teams moved through the forest, following GPS coordinates that would lead them directly to us. "This is why the federal agents can't be allowed to interfere," another ranger said, this one wearing a uniform from the 1970s. "If they disrupt the autumn collection, all of us return to the living world simultaneously. The park would become a nexus of temporal chaos." I understood then why my grandmother's records had been so incomplete. She hadn't been documenting the collections. She'd been concealing them from the very system she served within. Every missing person report, every unexplained disappearance, every family that vanished without a trace had been carefully managed to avoid federal attention. "What do you need me to do?" "Release us," the fake Mayeli said. "We've been holding the boundaries stable for decades, but our time of service is ending. The park needs a living guardian, not an army of the dead." The helicopters were getting closer. Through the trees, I could see agents in tactical gear moving toward our position. In minutes, they'd discover 37 people who'd supposedly died across 6 decades, all standing together in a section of forest that had been thoroughly surveyed dozens of times. I raised my hands, and the army of dead rangers began to fade. But instead of disappearing like the families had done, they stepped forward one by one and touched my shoulder. Each contact sent a jolt of knowledge through me. Decades of experience, learned protocols, understanding of how the temporal collection system really worked. The last to approach was the woman wearing my grandmother's face. "The compact is yours now, E. But remember, the rules exist to protect everyone, not just the displaced families. Guard them carefully." She dissolved into motes of light that drifted upward and scattered. The helicopters reached the clearing just as the last ranger vanished. FBI agents emerged from the tree line, weapons drawn, scanning an empty burned section that showed no sign of recent occupation. Their electromagnetic detection equipment registered normal background levels. I stood alone among the charred stumps, holding the device that now showed 0 red dots. The autumn collection was complete. "Ranger Koyukon," Agent Morrison called out. "We've been looking for you. We had reports of electromagnetic anomalies in this area." "Just routine fire damage assessment," I replied, pocketing the device. "Some of the burned trees are creating mineral deposits that can interfere with radio signals." They searched the area for 2 hours but found nothing unusual. No evidence of displaced families. No trace of temporal paradoxes. No proof that anything supernatural had ever occurred in Denali National Park. The federal investigation was officially closed a week later. Rebecca Chen's testimony was dismissed as trauma-induced hallucinations. The missing persons cases were reclassified as standard wilderness accidents. I still wear the obsidian pendant. I still carry salt in my patrol pack and keep emergency flares in my truck. The rules posted behind the coffee maker in the break room remain, waiting for the next ranger who needs to learn them. Because the between walkers still collect families who get lost between realities. The temporal paradoxes still form around grief and memory and love that refuses to let go. And somewhere in the vast wilderness of Denali, people who died years ago are still trying to find their way home. My name is Elijah Koyukon, and I'm the guardian of boundaries most people never see. My grandmother's compact protects this land and everyone who visits it, living or dead. The rules exist for a reason. Follow them.